Well, it's been a quiet week in Lake Wobegon, my hometown, not too far north of here. This last week, combination of the wind and the rain brought down a lot of leaves off the trees and whatever gorgeousness that town has had. When the foliage is removed, it tends to look a little bleak up there. And I suppose depressing to some people. I know that a lot of storytellers would look at a scene up there looking down the main street and make up stories in which the people go crazy, you know, in which decent, God-fearing people just go over the edge and go berserk from lust or something. But the only lust that I noticed up there this week was the lust for firewood, which is getting pretty hot and heavy right now. A lot more people are burning with wood up there. And, of course, they build up their wood piles all during the summer. But along about this time, there's a kind of a mania, kind of a firewood mania that sets in among these people. And rumors go around town, rumors of a few fallen oaks out just north of town. Rumors of a load of scrap lumber out in a shed just out north of the Tolleroods, a lumber load out there waiting for somebody to haul it away. I've seen people drive down the county road and screech to a halt, throw it in reverse, back up about 100 yards, make a kid go down in the ditch, just get a little 2x4, a little scrap down there. Clarence Bunsen came home here this last week. Found some guys tearing down his old garage out in the backyard. He said, hey, what you doing? And he remembered he'd hired them to do that. He wanted it for firewood. Now, it's not so much that they're worried about freezing, because they all do still have their oil furnaces. And I don't know if it's even that they are thinking so much about the money they'll save by burning wood, as it is just lust, you know, just plain lust. They're all collectors is what they are. Have about 10 cords out in your backyard, you know, you want to have 12. You have 12, you want 15. Just collectors, like other people are in town. Some people collect plates, and some people collect salt and pepper shakers. Mrs. Bowser has hundreds of elephant figurines. My mother used to collect canned tomatoes. She'd always put up about 100 jars. At the end of the growing season, I think she used to go down there at night just to run her hands over them, count them. Feel prosperous. Feel like if you had canned tomatoes, you know, you had some resources to operate on. She collected Reader's Digests, National Geographics. She collected cloth, too, to make braided rugs. You know, she'd go around at night sometimes, picking up things. I remember seeing her moving through the dark, looking for rags. If we kids had favorite old clothes that we loved, we had to hide them under our pillows at night. Otherwise, Mother'd come take them, make rugs from. I used to collect author's cards. That's what I collected. There was a particular brand, a Jawbreaker, that would have 5 author's cards in each pack. I think I had about 25 Whitmans and about 14 Mark Twains. I used to sit and look at them, just count them. Then they discontinued those Jawbreakers. It was a sad day looking at my stack of author cards, and knowing that I'd never have any more than that. That's all there would be. It was about that time, how old was I? I think about 8 or 9. I started to become an author myself, started to write. It happened one day when I went down in the basement into a dresser, an old bureau dresser that she used to store things in, you know, old clothes hangers and cardboard tubes out of Christmas wrapping paper, used greeting cards, that sort of thing. And I remember in the bottom drawer I found a box. was a box, and I opened it up, and there were all of the worksheets that I had ever brought home from school. All in that box. I had no idea she was saving them. I'd never thought that much about them, when I did them. I brought them home, and there they all were. And it was impressive. It made me feel important that she'd saved those things I'd done in school. As if maybe in coloring those maps, or in filling in those sentences with the right verb tense, that I'd shown some talent, that I wasn't aware of. And I thought, well, if she's impressed, I thought, by seeing sentences filled in, wait till she sees some that I've written myself. So I started to write. I wrote in bed. I wrote in bed at night with a little pen light in my mouth. I wrote stories in bed. I kept my writing supplies up in the springs of the bunk bed atop mine. I used a big red Indian Chief tablet, and I used different colored pencils, soft colored pencils, which I used to indicate the mood of the story sometimes. Brown if it was sad, or yellow if it were happy, and blue if it was taking place outdoors, which wasn't always clear from the story, see, because these were magical stories, each of them about a page long, in which magical things happened on every page, and people talked to animals, and animals talked to people, and sometimes people turned into animals, and vice versa. Sometimes people would wish for things, and animals would bring them what they wanted. And I wrote them, and it was going pretty good, and I had almost a tablet full, until I started to think about the reader, which is always a mistake. But in a house with 5 brothers and sisters, I knew I was bound to get a reader sooner or later. And I thought they'd look at that and think that was awfully dumb, wouldn't they? All these fairy tales. So I crossed out my name. I wrote in another name. I wrote in Bob Osseo. Maybe they'd think it was him. And then I decided that maybe the stories ought to be funny, which I don't know exactly why I thought that, except that I had an uncle who was a funny man. I used to admire him whenever he'd come over. The way he'd sit around in the living room with all the others and say funny stuff, just a few words or a sentence or something. Everybody'd throw their heads back, laugh at Uncle Jack. People come out of the kitchen saying, "What'd he say? What'd he say?" And they'd tell him. Oh, they'd laugh. Oh, that Jack. That Jack, he's such a card. I liked the way that everybody sort of leaned in towards him, waiting for him to say something amusing. And so I thought I'd write funny stuff. Problem was that the only thing that I wrote or said that was funny to other people that I knew of was boogers, which I was 8 or 9 years old at the time. That was kind of the staple of our humor among my friends and myself. I remember a group of us boys sit out under the trees during recess at school, and we play a little game in which you substitute the word booger for a word in a title of a book or a movie or a song, radio show. And we'd all sit there thinking up stuff, I'm looking over a 4-pound booger. Lone booger and Fibber McGee and booger. And we'd just fall all over ourselves, just almost wet our pants at our own comedy. Boys lying there, rolling around, laughing, weak, crying. You know how it is when you when you laugh until your face starts to hurt. Your face goes into spasms, just frozen there, sitting there crying, you feel like you're about to die. So I started incorporating some of that material into my stories, and I passed them around in class in school. You know, when people are somewhere like in a classroom where they're not supposed to laugh, that's when you get some real big laughs every so often. Tremendous atmospheric pressure builds up inside children when they know they're not supposed to laugh. And they try and ease it out a little bit, not knowing which way it might explode. And some of them read my stories, and I'd hear a and I'd hear and then I'd hear a I remember sitting in the back of the room while one of my stories about boogers was making the rounds of the room. And I came to a boy a few seats up ahead of me, and he looked at it, and he let out one of those snorts. And Miss Lewis caught him, and she looked down, and she said, "If it's so funny, Donald, why don't you repeat it for the rest of the class?" Poor boy stood up, and he had to read the whole thing. She made him do it, including the part that had made him snort. And when he read that, some other people snorted. A girl snorted sitting in front of me who was so embarrassed to have done this in school that she started crying. She ran out of the room. And Donald was embarrassed. And when she asked him who did it, he fingered me. He pointed back at me. She said, "Come up here." And I walked up to the front of the class, and I looked up at Miss Lewis, and she smacked me one across the side of my head. And she made me stand there in front of the blackboard for 15 minutes looking at the class. I tell you, I've been humiliated, but never like that. My face was hot. It itched. My eyes itched because they were full of tears. I didn't know what to do with my hands. Everything was blurry. I was afraid. I was afraid she was going to call the police and send me to jail. I thought it was that bad. And you know, she often talked about calling the police and sending us to jail. Which I guess was her joke, but I didn't know that. And I stood there, and I suffered, and I died. Which I guess has happened to a lot of people in comedy. That same sort of experience, and when it does, you always look for some other comedy to save you. And I remember that what saved me was noticing, as I had noticed before about Miss Lewis, the fact that her shoes made a noise when she walked. She had kind of fat, sweaty feet in little Oxford shoes. And when she took a step, evidently it created some sort of vacuum in there under her feet. So that as she walked back and forth, these shoes talked. With every step, they made a little poot. And that was a wonderful thing, to listen to those shoes, because then everything started to seem funny to me. Everything, the way everything looked, and everybody and her, everything seemed funny again. I also discovered who my friends were. My friends were the people who did not look at me. They didn't look at me out of decency, respecting that I was being punished. And so, since my friends were not looking at me, it was not my friends but the other people who were looking when I when Miss Lewis turned her back, pretended to pull a long one out of my nose. And so they all laughed, and they all got punished for it. Well, that's the other side of comedy, is revenge. But we're all looking for something like those talking shoes, I tell you. Whenever things are bad, and looking for just that little bit of comedy, little string, little smidgen of comedy that will make us see other things as being funny as they are. And though the world is often as flat and hard as Miss Lewis's hand, there are rivers of comedy that run underground if you just get down to them. So God give us water. That's the news from Lake Wobegon, Minnesota, where all the women are strong, all the men are good looking, and all the children are above average.